Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Gross from the marketing team. Thank you for joining today's webinar about modernizing your private certificate strategy. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll share that with you after we wrap up. If you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A section, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Your hosts for today's webinar are Henry Lamb, Product Management Director at Sectigo, and Jason Sirocco, Senior Fellow at Sectigo. Gentlemen, over to you.
Thanks very much. Henry, I'm going to have you kick in right after me here, but I really want to talk quickly about what we are discussing today, which really, if I were to sum it up, is this ain't your grandpa's PKI. You might remember how setting up PKI in the past, and very specifically private certificate authorities in the past, took a lot of professional services, used a lot of bespoke on-premise tools, and generally was an incredibly siloed and risky operation, and not the least of which was expensive, and ultimately took a lot of time to get value out of it. And so much has changed. When you compare what Henry is about to show you to Active Directory certificate services as an example, it really will start to stand out as to what has changed, why it's changed, and how new hybrid environments in multi-operating system type of use cases and scenarios for multiple applications. That's the world we're living in today, and that's the world in which yesterday's tools were not built for. So the rise of the modern private certificate authority is what we're talking about here, and there's a really big difference in terms of the way things have been from the past. One type of environment that never even existed back in the days when I was first playing around with early certificate authorities were use cases around mobile operating systems, uh, hybrid cloud, DevOps environments, being able to have certificates, private certificate authorities, enabling TLS certificates for the purposes of authentication within those kinds of environments is something that you guys need, and something that as an industry we have delivered on. Not the least of which now is the context of cryptographic agility and planning for post-quantum. Having a future-proofed private certificate authority is just absolutely critical. And time to market is now more critical than ever. You don't have a year or a year and a half, the way that old PKI used to be able to take that long with a team of professional services to be able to install. Now it needs to be turnkey. Why shouldn't it be? Because everything else is right now. Next slide. So yeah, Henry.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. So partially, most people haven't signed up for this in terms of having what is happening in the industry. Most, if not all, if you don't know it yet, you will eventually get into a firefighting mode. Here's the basic reality. To what Jason said before, back in the day, it is a very closed environment that is only within your four walls, including whatever data set you have. In the last 10, 15 years or so, it started extending outwards to the likes of the Amazons, the Googles, and the Microsofts of the world for public cloud. And then it started moving over to mobile device, and then to IoT devices, and then to printers as well that you need to secure. And that's where we are at today as a reality. Certs, as much people say that it is not as prevalent as before, it is everywhere. It is all behind the scenes that you don't know of. And it will cause problems. And what does it really cause at the end of the day? You issue a cert that could be out there for 15 years, and it breaks down, you don't know about it. And it causes an outage and breaks a communication pipeline that could be down for days or hours and cost you hundreds or not millions of dollars. You could have very rigid systems in the past that you built that is for legacy tools only, that you can't scale up to some of the modern capabilities that is needed for agility purposes of cert issuance and in different places along the way. Biggest thing back to the whole cert outage, visibility. You issue a cert. We talk to customers all the time. We talk to people all the time, even just regular folks that we know that are in the industry. they have cert outages, and the amount of pain they cause is way more than trying to look at a modern enablement capability. And lastly, everyone is still used to the ability to manually issue a cert because they're familiar with it, because it is tried and true. It's there, but it's not to say it'll go away, but it is time to evolve beyond that point. Next slide, please. So, like I said before, here's what you don't see. Everyone sees a certificate is there. What you do over a course of a year, 2, 5, 10, 15, whatever amount, you eventually get to a point where you start small and then you start growing because of different needs along the way. You can then slowly then create different CAs for different environments. And then you over time have a lot of different things you're doing in the background. But from a consumption perspective, it's still a cert. But now you create more complexity within your environment that you never had an intention, but now you have it. Which then eventually causes sprawls because now you have to worry about different CAs, different environment, different requirements. So you then have to then create different ways of getting a cert or automating it, whether you use a script, you have to integrate with a new pipeline that was never built for, or integrate it with management solution that is not within your four walls. So you have to deal with that behind the scenes, which is additional workload. Again, and then comes back down to once you do all of that, you may have built something there, but do you know if you have it's maintained? Do you know what it's doing? Do you know where the certs are? Are you worried about an infrastructure going down if you have to maintain checking if a cert have expired or revoked? And it leads down to once a cert's issued, you don't know about it, it creates multiple problems down the road. Jay, any input from your side?
I would say that one of the things, if you get nothing out of this slide other than this, is the visibility gaps in private certificate authorities are massive. One of the things we could have put in the second column here would have been even the big clouds, right? Azure, AWS, Google. Add that to the mix. There's just so many places where certificates exist, and you can't manage what you don't know you have. And so therefore these visibility gaps are massive. And that's how you're ending up with that fourth column of silent certificate failures and loss of visibility, loss of ability to govern. I remember back in the day when governance of PKI was just such an important thing. Now it's because it's happening and certificates are happening in so many different places that you might not even be aware of. You know, did you know that your Kubernetes clusters actually have private certificate authorities sitting underneath them beside other private certificate authorities that you didn't even know you had to govern? The visibility gaps is probably the number one thing on this list here. Thanks.
Next slide. So here are the common use cases and one big challenge. Different use cases, and these are just some, they're not all. Like Jason mentioned, Kubernetes is one of them in the list of utilizing potentially a CA inside Kubernetes, or you could utilize it with an application that can get you a cert. You could worry about VPN authentication, Wi-Fi access point provisioning in terms of authenticating to Wi-Fi, users and workload. It could be workload, could be a person, a device, or something that you spin up and bring down. And then also for certificates that are for managed devices in the Intunes, the Jamf, the AirWatches of the world. There's actually way more than that, right? Because we can list off, and the list goes on and on and on. But one of the big thing is that it's different teams doing different things that need the certificate, and in some cases, we hope it doesn't happen, but it happens. It's a same cert in different location where you could create multiple single point of failures by accident. Even though each cases are potentially solved today, it's inconsistency that happens in terms of one area could be a manual issuance, another one could be automation, and then another way of you take one key and copy it to multiple places. The challenge is that you are doing things just to satisfy a criteria that you need a cert. Okay. Anything else to add?
No, that you covered it. Thank you.
All right. Next slide. Do you want to kind of go for this one, Jay, or do you want me to continue?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics. For those of you who have set up Active Directory certificate services, and it could have been in the last 15 years plus. If for those of you who came from a Microsoft stack world, and I certainly lived there back in the day, this wasn't a bad move. In fact, the ability to put certificates into anything that was domain attached just made sense. If you were thoroughly Microsoft stack, Active Directory service certificate services worked very closely with Active Directory, and you could get your certs where you needed to. Henry, how often do you live in a domain attached environment?
Still a lot. Even though most people are trying to move to the cloud, there's still a lot around.
There's still a lot around, but I'll tell you that most of my day is not domain attached.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of my day with the Mac, with iOS, with Linux, and I'm nowhere near a Microsoft stack. And so therefore, when your enterprise was entirely Microsoft, uh, this actually did make some sense. But I think now everything is a shim within Active Directory certificate services. Active Directory itself, I think, is something that most of you, other than outside of the cloud, need to think of as something that is legacy, something that will probably be around for many years to come, but it's not something you want to build anything net new on. And one of the things that's incredibly important to note is that if you're setting up a new private certificate authority, I would really look at a modern private certificate authority rather than Active Directory certificate services. Not the least of which, Henry, is the fact that it was only June of this year, right? This month. It took this long for Microsoft even to start to talk about PQC capabilities being brought to Active Directory certificate services, and not very many details were given. Well, that doesn't give me an awful big warm and fuzzy in terms of being a future-proofed certificate authority. And so therefore, I think that we're going to live in a world for many, many years to come where ADCS is with us. On the other hand, I think what is needed is two things. Number one, handling today's modern use cases that are not domain attached and are beyond just Microsoft operating systems, and also being able to be future proof for post quantum. And so, therefore, I can't sit here and say you should rip and replace your Active Directory certificate services, although some of you may want to do that. However, I think what's more realistic is this ability to augment Active Directory certificate services with a modern private certificate authority and have them work together. And there's many different PKI trust models that actually can help and help you with those kinds of scenarios. So just keep in mind the Active Directory certificate services that you are maintaining today, uh, they can live on. However, building upon them should be with a modern private certificate authority. When I say modern, I say ready for all the modern operating systems, use cases, hybrid cloud, on-prem, etc. Type of world that you live in right now, as well as being future-proofed for post-quantum and cryptographic agility in general. Things that Active Directory certificate services were never originally built for. And
Okay.
Henry, of
So
course, yeah, go ahead. On top of all this, right?
yeah.
There's just so much on top of Active Directory certificate services beyond that is net new within your environment. And Henry, I'm sure you got plenty to talk about on that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's how do you achieve modernization? So in order to do that, let's revisit the actual what is a legacy PKI look like, as what Jason mentioned. Traditionally, it was built for ADCS for a domain joined only environment. You could still have a standalone, but it's not as good as a domain joined. It's generally Windows centric. It is very hard, very brittle in terms of just the system itself because of resourcing requirements. HSM was always an afterthought when it comes to those things, simply because unless there's a hard requirement from an industry perspective that you're in, or a compliancy requirement, you don't really need that. And then the deployment is heavy because while building the CA inside an environment is easy, once you start extending outbound beyond your four walls, you have to then spin up different services that can be publicly available to maintain, whether it is to consume a cert using a protocol, a form, revocation, or whatever it may be, or multiple systems just because you need to start offloading due to resourcing issue. And then the other thing too you worry about is you build something today because, or sorry, you maybe built something 10 years ago that you say it's good enough, but as the industry has changed over the last 10 years, there are certain things that were done in the past that don't seem to align with today's thought process and best practices on how a cert is issued, how long they're good for, what keys are utilized, and so forth. So you are left with needing to, like Jay said, shim something in the middle of it just to make it work so that you are at least up to the latest compliancy or recommendations in today's industry. Whereas when you look at a current modern private CA, you start thinking about you need to build a CA that could be for still domain joined environments, but you also worry about things that are not within a traditional domain that could be, again, back to what Jay mentioned, a Mac-centric environment, a public cloud. It could be any system that is that needs it for an identity purposes, whether it is a laptop, desktop, a mobile phone, a printer. Which is then goes to the cross-platform and hybrid scenario. Because if you run it on-prem, everything I just mentioned, you still need to worry about it. Do you then consider a hybrid model or a cloud-only model so that you could satisfy all those criterias? The other thing you have to also consider is, in the past, it's all about writing a shell script or writing a PowerShell script to do that work. You then look for a modern PKI that uses the most, I won't say latest and greatest, but more modern ways of getting a certificate using RESTful APIs rather than the traditional PowerShell and shell script. Not to say those won't still be around, but those are the things you have to consider from a modern PKI. Along with the keys that you create for the CAs. Do you leave it on the file system or do you store it into HSM that's secure? Again, some industries may not need it, but the idea is if a key for a CA is stolen, you have bigger problems on your hand. How do you secure it? You've got to consider thinking about sticking those keys into a secure HSM that is tamper-proof. So if someone ever tried to steal it, they may physically have to steal the HSM from you. Or else you could run the risk of someone impersonating as your organization, create a CA, start issuing certs, and you have bigger issues on your hand. Another thing, building a system is easy always at the first time going around. It's always maintenance. It's always long term of how big does it grow, and can you do it fast and lightweight? Because if you make it big and heavy and cumbersome, you create yourself more work down the road. Also, too, is that it's focused for internal trust only, simply because you create a CA. Do you want to make it public trust? It's not that easy because you have to join the CAP form to do it. If it's internally focused, where is it internally focused? Within your four walls, public cloud, maybe another vendor needs to connect to you. They may trust. Will you consider them as your internal trust as well? But think of those things, right? From a modernization of what you need to do because of how things have basically, quote unquote, exploded over the last 15 years of where things could go or where certificates could live that is utilized for whatever purpose it is. Next slide. Want me to take a stab at this, Jay? Do you want to continue on?
Yeah, we'll take turns. I think that one thing that's not discussed enough, it's funny how when we talk about PKI, we talk a lot about encryption, signing, authentication, and I think there's an entirely, a fourth category that's very important to PKI overall, and that is in terms of trust models. And what trust models and PKI allow you to do, if you're working with a PKI vendor that has flexibility, is that one of the questions that you really should be asking is how are you designing your root certificate authorities, your issuing certificate authorities, and who signs who, which one's on-prem, which one's in the cloud? Well, here's the answer. You can do all of it. That's the true answer. And because in private certificate authorities, not every use case should look like the other. And this is where years of experience come in terms of how things should be designed. I think that one of the reasons we have this slide here, and Henry can talk a bit more about this, but the point I want to make is you probably already have an existing private certificate authority of some kind. You might already be working with Microsoft Active Directory Certificate Services, MSCA. You might already be working with a cloud key generation provider of some kind. You just never know what kind of environments that you have. You might have that Kubernetes cluster sitting underneath somewhere. Where does a modern Sectigo private certificate authority sit? The point is that it can sit just about anywhere. It can be the ultimate offline route. It can play the role of an issuing CA, augmenting another route, and therefore, I just want to encourage everybody to think about how flexibility in PKI trust models allows you to answer this question of, can I have my own route where my private keys are sitting on premise close to me, and then I can offload my issuing CA needs off to Sectigo into the cloud where it belongs? And the answer is absolutely yes. And we fit with those trust models incredibly well. And Henry, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, to Jay's point, it's from our perspective, it is, you can have a route with us, you can have your own. It doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, it's all about what are you most comfortable with in this new design of what you wanted to do from a trust model perspective. That's pretty much for this. We can drone on for hours on this, but I think we kind of stop it here, and then if there's further questions, more than what I have you guys ask the questions, we can more happy to answer it. Next slide. So interestingly enough, I'll talk to this slide. Someone coined it a spider slide a couple of years ago, so it always stuck with me. So this is our spider slide of what we call Sectigo Certificate Manager, on what our solution offers for customers to utilize for certificate issuance. I know in this specific topic or this webinar, we're around ADCS and private certs, but our platform as a whole can do public and private cert issuance. The idea of this is that a cert is a cert is a cert at the end of the day, which allows you to issue, you can issue a cert from wherever it is, but in our platform, we allow you to consolidate in one place and do the cert issuance, whether you want to do it manually, whether you want to use a protocol, whether you want to use an agent or a third-party solution, or if you want to integrate with your own third-party vendor in terms of cert issuance. And from our perspective, to what Jason mentioned, you could be a traditional legacy environment that you have inside, that you have for ADCS. You could be building a trust model where it's a hybrid, whether it's with Sectigo or even with a Microsoft CA or with an Amazon or Google. But the idea is we can connect to these other locations using our platform, and then you would use our platform for cert issuance, so it's all consolidated in one place, which then allows you to tackle several things simultaneously. One, you have a single place for a modern set of APIs to call to get a certificate. Two, you have the ability for you gain the ability for visibility of what certs are issued, because it has to go through a single platform for that. Three, you will get all the bells and whistles as need to in terms of notifications or reporting of what is issued, what's expiring. And three, if you have a legacy infrastructure, a legacy CA you want to connect to, we can connect to it. And therefore, you don't have to worry about how do I then change my legacy environment to match a modern. This would just be an overlay within your environment, within that CA itself, and then we become the front end system that you would request a cert from. All right, next slide, please. So what does it do? It doesn't, by having our platform, your team doesn't have to start from ground up, meaning that if you were to do this on your own, let's assume you have ADCS or an OpenSSL, and you would try to build a modern CA, every team within your environment would potentially need to, if the new modern CA doesn't support what it is, have to build all net new. With our system, what happens is, at least from our platform, we would sit as the intermediary in between your CA and your end technical teams for consumption. And then based on what it is, there are certain tools or certain features within the application itself that could connect to our platform to get the certificate. So therefore, you are removing the overhead of needing to manually create scripts or write their own code if write their own code to get the cert. There's still some instances where you need to do it, but the idea is that it is a single place to get it. So therefore, you don't have to pop open ports. You don't have to make certain systems wide open just to get a certificate from the CA itself. Jay, any input from your side on this?
No, I think you made the point really well.
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to figure out how to get their job done with modern tooling as well as antique tooling, such as the old private certificate authorities. Authentication's everywhere. And in fact, I think Henry said it best. A lot of people are thinking that certificates in general, one of the things that has happened within this world is that they've become so absolutely ingrained in all of these modern tools that people don't think about how the authentication is occurring. It's almost like by magic. Well, certificates are providing that magic. The problem is, unless you have visibility to it and the ability to manage it, it can get really bad really fast, as Henry had said earlier. And so this is where for those of you who manage certificate authorities or those of you who manage risk overall within an organization, I'm betting all of you can envision the enterprise silos between each of these use cases. In other words, these are very separate groups of people. And the left hand's not talking to the right hand. And so therefore, if you were to ask the simple question, where are my cryptographic assets within my organization? You'd have to bring all these multiple teams together. And so having visibility to all the cryptographic assets that are performing all this magic underneath all these modern use cases, it's all happening with modern certificates and the way that they are used for authentication within TLS. It's a modern miracle, but unfortunately, the one of the layers that's yet to be remaining is the silos between each of these technologies is still there, and it needs to be broken down in order to be able to govern these things properly. Thanks, Henry.
Next slide, please. So everyone on this call is probably wondering, do you need to modernize? The answer is, if you're not on the path, you need to consider it, simply because the world is evolving. And you need to worry about what's coming out next. There's a topic that we'll discuss a little bit later that is going to be, no matter what, will push us towards modernizing our PKI, even for yourselves, even for us as well too. But we need to consider about modernizing it today. There is the reason why you need to modernize is there are risks associated with not modernizing. I understand it's very hard. It's easier said than done. But if you don't start that journey today, it'll never happen. That becomes the elephant in the room, and then it becomes your 11th hour fire drill, which you don't want to do. Not to mention, depending upon which industry you're on, you may have regulatory stuff that's coming down that you may know of already, and if you wait too long, you are running the risk of not being compliant with the regulatory whatever you're doing with in your industry, whether it's a PCI, HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley, whatever it could be. They could still affect you. In terms of other areas to worry about, I know this is a topic specifically on private. Google also talks about next year where they, on the public side, again, not on the private side, they plan to remove client auth from the public cert, which has a net effect to private simply because of some of the industry changes on the public side that then has somewhat adverse effects on the private side as well, because it's a new concept that people need to get familiar with and have to worry about it, because the last 20 years it's been one side, it's now being pushed to the other side. And then the other thing to do is you could get a get out of jail free card if you really wanted to, where we have the ability to create you a modern PKI that could help with alleviating some of this. And back to a couple slides ago, Jason talked about the different models of PKI, where it could be a model where it's a hybrid or fully hosted, or it could be a mix of cross-signing as well. But the idea is that it's helping you achieve something that you may originally thought that it would take months or if not years and lots of money to do, where it could be very, very simple if you weren't already aware of it, that Sectigo could help with.
Henry's such a polite guy. I'm gonna assign you everybody who's watching homework right now. How many of you know whether or not you are using TLS client authentication certificates? That's first question. Because a lot of you, I know for a fact, are using TLS server certificates. TLS server certificates, that's what's going into your web servers, communicating with web browsers, fantastic. TLS client authentication certificates are used by many of you in place of using a proper private CA. And that's because of what we talked about earlier. Past private certificate authorities were hard to use. It was just simply easier to go get yourself a public certificate and be done with it and use it for the purposes of authentication. That is going away. You have 1 year to figure it out. And we're ringing the bell here right now. So that is your homework. Figure out where you are using TLS client authentication certificates and then start to think about how you're going to replace that with a private certificate authority.
Next slide. So this kind of goes back to some of the previous slides and previous topics we've had. If you don't know, how do you consult? How do you know what you have? And Sectigo as a company can help with that with our platform in terms of being able to find those certs, enforce policy, consolidate at one place to help you address Jay's question, where are those certs right now? Because if you don't know, you will have multiple fire drills beyond that what you imagine have. You may already know, which is awesome. If you don't, I hope you do consider finding out sooner rather than later, because it is a change that most people don't know of. Plus, also, on top of all the conversation we have about private PKI and modernization, our platform has that capability to help you out. So in terms of discovery, issuance, also allow you to bridge legacy infrastructure to a more agnostic infrastructure, whether it is on-prem or in the cloud. Any comments on
You
that, Jay?
can't manage what you don't know you have.
Yep.
And frankly, every certificate should be a managed certificate. And I think that in the past, people were winging it. And I think that won't cut the mustard anymore, especially in a world where delayed revocation on publicly trusted certificates is no longer tolerated. That's a whole other webinar. The fact that TLS client authentication certificates are no longer trusted a year from now, that's what we're trying to ring the bell on right now. And then we have post-quantum after that. There are now multiple on top of multiple reasons why this slide should be of extreme interest to you. And Henry said it best. If you don't know where your certs are, you're going to have multiple fire drills and none of them are going to be pleasant. So folks, we're ringing the bell. This is really important stuff at this point in time.
So this leads to also helps you achieve a few other things too. In our platform, it'll help you kind of shrink down the amount of time you need to spend building something or to streamline something. Because if you look at it back in the day, you could be building an automation with Terraform where you have to write a million different shell scripts to help out. Whereas in our system, you can use our APIs, or maybe if you need to do Kubernetes and you need to put a cert for every container that comes up, gone are the days of shell scripts to do with it. You could use a standard protocol to help you out. That is our system could help with. If you needed a private CA because yours is either compromised, expiring, or it's too it's using weak keys, we could spin you up in minutes or hours to get you up and running to start issuing private certs, so that you're so that you are less vulnerable, and then you meet your compliance requirements. The idea is this. Legacy PKI had a purpose years ago. You could use our platform to help you alleviate that pressure And then over time, you could also look at alleviating your pressure of even maintaining that private PKI and give it to us as well. But the idea is that you're taking a timeline that could have taken years down to months, weeks, or days in one single place.
Thanks,
Okay.
Henry.
Next slide. Jay, this is more your area. I'll give it to you.
Yeah, I could tell you, planning for post-quantum is interesting, isn't it? Because you've got a double whammy of problems where you've got legacy private CAs that never had to think much about what cryptographic algorithm was being used. You've got new use cases, and you've got just an explosion of the amount of complexity within the systems that you're actually operating. And so it just highlights this importance for visibility. The ability to do the homework that you've been assigned, which is discovering and providing context to the cryptographic assets being digital certificates, understanding the underlying algorithms, the lifespans, who are their owners. It's just so important. All of that context is what should go into the inventory that's at the front of your homework that you need to be doing. Understanding what the problems are with RSA, elliptic curve cryptography, understanding those vulnerabilities, and then applying a cryptographically aware mindset to the policies that you're creating within your governance. So, in other words, you can't manage what you don't know you have. You need discovery. You need the ability to tag all of this context, understanding the vulnerabilities that are going to be there today and tomorrow, having a modern policy once you've taken that inventory, and then understanding what your transition path is going to be in the future. These are really the four categories of thinking that you need to be doing. And I would say that, yes, we have post-quantum listed on this slide, but in reality, there's a number of reasons why you could actually need all of these four segments of homework, which is essentially what this is. It is your homework list. And I challenge you to take a look at everything from White House executive orders to NIST to NIS2 to DORA to you. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what regulated industry you're in. It doesn't matter what jurisdiction you're in. Everybody is saying the same thing. You have to start with taking that inventory, understand the vulnerabilities, applying cryptographically aware policies, and then you can start thinking about what your path forward is. In conjunction with the fact that we're living in a world where now applications are built completely differently than they were even 5 years ago, and AI has entered the room and has become the room. And on top of that, you have to think about it where what used to be cryptography was at the back of your mind, it now has to come to the front of your mind in order to build policies that are aware of it. That's a tall order, but I don't think there is a way around it in order for you to be successful as we enter this era where quantum computing is going to affect all of us in how we do things. Next slide.
All right.
Henry, take it away.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so key takeaways. So we talk about a legacy PKI, and we talk about Sectigo providing some capabilities for you. You don't have to do a rip and replace. You can, if you choose to help modernize your PKI as a whole. If not, you could utilize our application or our CLM to overlay on top so you don't have to rip and replace your CA. But if you choose to, we can help you with that as well. With our CLM, you don't have to do it all at once. You do it on what you want to do from a tactical perspective or the most strategic perspective. And then you slowly scale it over time. You start kind of utilizing the platform as a whole as the interface to the CA. Again, whether it is a legacy infrastructure or if it's a CA that we host or if it's a hybrid, doesn't really matter. It also then allows you to integrate with any tools you have. So we have API sets, or a protocol, and you can then build a tool to utilize against those respective APIs or protocols. Or if there's something built, you can integrate with that. And on top of all of that, to what Jay was talking about from post-quantum, and it's kind of a little bit beyond post-quantum, because you have it in one place, you gain visibility, discovery, automation, and you can start governing what type of certs are issued out of the platform, because we give you certain controls in the system to say you can issue a cert that is only for 30 days, 60 days, or use specific key types that are not, that is a little bit stronger than the industry standard because you have requirements behind that. But the idea is that you could do it in a single platform, and you could do it today if you wanted to, and you don't have to start planning months and months and months and months out in advance of how to modernize your PKI and do it by yourself.
Well said.
Yeah. So here is Certigo is your IT estate. We give you a comprehensive CLM that could connect to your existing environment if you choose to. We are 100% cloud native, meaning that you're not taking our CLM, deploying a heavy solution in your environment just to modernize your PKI. We have the entire infrastructure that we host for you that you can connect to. Which then allows us to work against whether it is a traditional PKI requirements within your four walls, or if you have a hybrid between your four walls and a public cloud, or if it's all pure public cloud. If you choose to use us as a CA, we are highly regulated. For anyone on the call that don't know, we issue public certificates, and because of that, we are part of something called CAB Forum, which regulates our public certs. And because of that, we have rigid requirements and rigid standards and compliances that we need to do that apply to the public cert, that by that extension also applies to anything that we have in our private environment from a regulation perspective, so that we are highly regulated. And because it's all cloud solution based, we do have fast deployment, whether you use API protocols, a client that can talk to our protocol, or something that we built. The idea is that you have fast implementation, fast deployment, shorter cycles of spending time to build things along the way within your environment. It's not to say you don't build anything at the end of the day. You probably will if you're very, very dev-centric shops. Dev-centric people like to build things, so we're not going to stop you from doing it, but you have that. But allows you to accelerate quicker than other areas where you know it's traditionally more heavy. And then from our system-wise, we have transparency pricing, whether it is just our certificate lifecycle management platform, whether it is a private PKI that we host for you, you can issue certs, whether it's a combo or whatever we want it to be. We have a solution that we could offer to you to help you address your needs.
I think Henry has said something really important that I want to highlight, which is a public certificate authority are typically going to be your smartest people in the world about how to set up a CA. They have to be, because they need to have roots that run for years and years and years and are never, ever compromised. That's the way a public certificate authority works. And it's a tough job. And it's a job that we do on a daily basis. What we've done here is take all of that heritage and capability and deliver it to you so that you can harness that absolutely bulletproof certificate authority architecture and then quickly utilize that value across all the authentication scenarios within your enterprise that require a certificate authority. So thanks for that, Henry. Very good.
I think that's the next slide. Jay, I'll let you close it off.
Yeah, so one of our team members internally here has written a great white book that I think you should really check out, and it goes into more depth about what Henry and I have touched on here today. And so download this, the business case for internal PKI. I think the way to think about it is this. It's a framework for how to think through the strategy of PKI overall in a modern sense. And this ain't your grandpa's PKI. And if you want to know what that actually means, I think that this white book will really help you to understand it. And, there's such a richness within this topic that, a short webinar like this can't cover it all. We can touch on things, but you really do need to start to look at what is available out there to you and how it hooks into your modern use cases, your modern authentication, how different disparate siloed teams can start to work together, and how you start to get a grip on how to do governance around all of this the way that you thought you were doing back in the 90s, but you can actually do today properly. So download it, check it out, and learn.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Henry. That was fantastic. We're going to jump into some questions here. So the QA is open. So if you have any questions, put them in there and we'll read them off for Henry and Jason. And we'll post that URL. There was a question on if this was being recorded. It is. We'll share the recording and the deck with you after this wraps up, and you'll be able to get that URL as well. So let's just jump into the first question here. So in a predominantly Windows environment, how do you realistically see the transition of existing legacy infrastructure, which is still tightly integrated with the traditional ADCS, towards modern API-driven without the need to deploy additional components inside the company, open additional ports, etc.?
I could take that one. Realistically, if you're looking from that perspective, a CLM will help you solve that. Simply because the CLM would become your interface to that legacy infrastructure to be able to issue a certificate. But in the long run, even that legacy infrastructure will, or that legacy ADCS will expire. It means that you still have to modernize, but at least with a CLM, you're able to at least extend capabilities for you to be able to request a certificate from that ADCS without having to build and extend it and host more infrastructure along the way that can get very, very complicated depending upon where the consumption or the cert request is coming from.
All right, fantastic. So I think that this might have been touched on a little bit earlier. We're talking about the changes to TLS for private auth certs. So can you expand maybe a little bit on how Private CA could help with that, or Sectigo specifically could help with that?
I can touch on some of that. So basically, if you think about how you authenticate to Wi-Fi access points, VPNs, how you authenticate salespeople to Salesforce.com, how you authenticate, uh, Docker containers to other Docker containers. There's so many places where TLS certificates are used for the purposes of authentication. In many of those cases, a private certificate authority is what's providing the certificates. But here's the big but. In a lot of those scenarios, TLS client authentication certificates are coming from public certificate authorities, not the least of which is Let's Encrypt, Sectigo, Entrust back in the day, etc. All of the big public CAs that you've gotten your publicly trusted SSL certificates for web server to browser encryption use cases. A lot of people were using public certificate authorities for the purposes of generating, issuing, getting, and then utilizing client authentication certificates for those authentication use cases. As I said, VPN, Windows Hello. We're talking about everything from Wi-Fi access point. There's so many places where the TLS client authentication certificates were being used. The problem is this. Google has made it really clear that quick revocation that are based on the CAB forum rules for publicly trusted certificates need absolutely to be adhered to. And the only way that Google feels that that's going to happen is if TLS client authentication certificates are no longer trusted by them for being called publicly trusted certificates. That means that your ability to get TLS client authentication certificates from a public certificate authority, that's going to dry up in a year from now. And so therefore, and here's the simplest way I can answer that question, you need to start looking at an actual private certificate authority to generate those client authentication use case type certificates. And that's where they belong anyway. I actually believe in what Google's doing. The problem is that you've only got a year to sort this out. And so therefore, having a look at private certificate authorities that are modern, like Henry was talking about today, that I think is job one. And so as part of your inventory taking of certificates for post-quantum and for all the other reasons why you need to gain visibility to your certificates, as Henry said earlier, you really do need to be taking inventory of where am I using TLS client authentication certificates, because those are probably going to be hard to get, not impossible to get, a year from now. And you'll need to replace that source with a private certificate authority.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So the next question we have, how does Sectigo handle secure key generation for our roots?
Jay, do you want to take it? You want to take it?
Go ahead, Henry.
Yeah, so basically, if we were to create, when it comes to a CA itself, we securely generate the keys in an HSM. It's is what Jay mentioned maybe 5 minutes ago. We're a public CA vendor. We've been doing this for, gosh, I think north of 25 years now, or 22 years now. So everything we've done over the years have always been the CAs we create, the keys are generated in HSM. And as we had evolved over the years, when we started offering our own private CA, we took that same, we'll say, pedigree of what we've done because of industry requirements. We applied it to the private side as well. So therefore, any keys we generate for our customers for a private CA that we host, it's in an HSM, it's secure, it's in FIPS mode. So therefore, it is not a key floating around on a Windows or Linux box where you could potentially compromise the box and steal the private key of a CA.
I'm just going to add to that because I'm so compelled. Folks, for those of you who set up your Active Directory certificate services in Microsoft Windows years ago, and you did it in software, that's no longer acceptable, guys. That's just, it's 2025, it's going to be 2026 real soon. And it's just absolutely unacceptable to be doing your key gen in software. It's a golden age to be a bad guy, because I think a lot of people think that, hey, I've got a firewall around my ADCS and therefore nobody can get to it. That is just false thinking. You need to be protecting your private keys inside of hardware. And that's the way we do it. And we do it because we are a public CA and we know how to do it right. Henry nailed it. So no longer acceptable, folks. You have to think about using HSM or using a private certificate authority from Sectigo, where we wrap away all that complexity away from you. That's the reason you come to us.
Thank you, guys. So this one, I think you kind of touched on this already, but does Sectigo provide a hosted private CA, and kind of what is the benefit of that? I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, I think I'll add a little bit more to it. So yes, the answer is we do provide a hosted private CA. Think of it this way. The main benefit behind that is, in a traditional legacy environment, you're maintaining the CA, you're maintaining the infrastructure. Depending on how long you've had that infrastructure, you're taking on 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 years of burden. Not to mention the amount of different systems you potentially need to bring up over the years because of new requirements or revocation requirements or extending to the cloud. So therefore, the main benefit of having it with Sectigo is we take all of that. We take on the burden of creating CA, hosting it for you, having the revocation, and then we pair it up with our CLM platform, which is your interface to getting that cert. So from an infrastructure side, you remove the headache to need to maintain all of that. So therefore, we take on all of that, and you just use our platform for cert issuance. I say it like that. There are some nuances behind it, but ultimately the biggest benefit is you remove the headache of an uptime of a CA in your environment. You remove the 2 a.m. calls saying that, oh, my revocation's down, or I can't get a cert in the public world because my NDES server is down. That's the main benefit of that.
Fantastic, thank you. So it looks like that's all for the submitted questions. You guys have any final thoughts you want to wrap on to take us out? Since we're almost at time anyway.
Folks, you have homework. Go do your homework. That's how I'm going to end it. If you aren't sure what I'm talking about, please review this webinar. I think Henry dropped a lot of golden nuggets on you, so please take this very seriously. This is stuff that was back of mind that needs to come front of mind. Private certificate authorities are the future of how you do authentication properly. Do visibility correctly. You can't manage what you don't know you have. Every cert should be a managed cert. There it is.
Henry, Jason, thanks for the great presentation. Thank you everybody for joining, and we'll send this recording out shortly.